Right, so it seems as though Chris Jericho might be done with AEW for a while, as he is stepping away from AEW TV to go on tour with his band Fozzy. And I gotta say, it is absolutely the right time for Chris Jericho to be stepping away from AEW for a bit, because for the last few months, AEW fans have been subjected to the Jericho verse, or the Jericho Vortex, whatever you want to call it, in its worst form ever. And it appears as though the Jericho verse, or the Jericho Vortex, has finally exploded. We won, but at what cost? We're going to explain the cost in just a second as you like the video, but we need to talk about the Jericho verse as a whole before we get there, because if you don't know what the Jericho Vortex is, it's essentially the idea that any person that Chris Jericho interacts with in AEW gets sucked into the Jericho Vortex, where they're stuck feuding with him in mediocre matches and promo segments until the end of time. As we know, Chris Jericho feuds basically never end, and they can never end, especially after just one match, and every Chris Jericho program in AEW more or less follows the same format, and 9 times out of 10 the person that Chris Jericho is feuding with doesn't come out of it in a better spot. Primary victims of the Jericho-verse include Eddie Kingston, American Top Team, Samuel Guevara, Hook, and all the various stables that he's been a part of. If you want to know more about that, go check out my full video on the Jericho Vortex, link down below. But on the topic of Chris Jericho stables, as we know, Chris Jericho loves a stable in AEW. In fact, he's had 3 of them: the Inner Circle, the Jericho Appreciation Society, and of course, most recently, the Learning Tree, alongside Big Bill and Brian Keith. And the Learning Tree seemingly exploded and set ablaze this past Wednesday on AEW Dynamite, following Chris Jericho's Ring of Honor title loss to Bandido at AEW Dynasty just a few days prior this past Sunday. And in this TV time with the Learning Tree segment, Chris Jericho comes out, he talks about his disappointment about losing to Bandido on Sunday. Big Bill and Brian Keith then come out, as Chris Jericho then proceeds to totally crash out as he expresses his disappointment in Big Bill and Brian Keith. He says he's not angry, he's just disappointed, and would repeat that phrase over and over again as he would just continue to crash out and smash his baseball bat into the Geritron. And he says until Big Bill and Brian Keith change that, then he thinks he needs to leave. He smashes the setup some more, he leaves the ring, and then leaves the arena as a whole. And whilst watching this, I was thinking, oh my god, Chris Jericho is actually being written off TV. This is the craziest thing I've seen in a while. I really wasn't expecting Jericho to just leave on his own accord like that. And then it had me paranoid and had me thinking that, oh no, this is probably one of Chris Jericho's terrible, unfunny Learning Tree gags, where he just comes back the next week, because wrestlers never truly retire or never truly leave or quit or whatever insider wrestling joke he wants to make now. But lo and behold, no, that's not the case, because as you guys informed me on the comments of my recent AEW Dynamite review of this episode, and as recent reports in the wrestling media world have suggested and stated, Chris Jericho is genuinely going to be gone from AEW TV for a while, as he is touring with his band Fozzy. And apparently Jericho feels as though it is the right time for him to be gone, and Chris Jericho, lad, I could not agree more. Go get yourself on that tour bus, grab yourself a little bit of the bubbly, and let's not mention him on AEW TV for at least 2 years. But yeah, we won. We should be celebrating, because Chris Jericho, who's easily been one of the worst parts, if not the worst part of AEW TV in the last year or so, is finally gone from AEW. We won. But at what cost did we win? Because in the Learning Tree's just under a year run, there were many victims of the Chris Jericho Vortex, which yes, while we did win with Jericho leaving, at what cost did we win, and how much did everyone who got sucked into the Jericho-verse actually benefit from it? Starting out with Hook, of course, he was who Jericho was feuding with initially, before the Learning Tree formed. In his feud with Hook, he beat him for the FTW title after Hook retained the first time, and would embarrass Hook for weeks alongside his new Learning Tree teammates Big Bill and Brian Keith, before Hook finally won the belt back at All In, and then retired it a week later, because why the hell is the FTW belt still even around, and why is Hook still fighting for it? Just shows zero progression in his AEW career. And the thing is, Hook is definitely in a better spot out of the Jericho verse, but I would say that has nothing to do with Chris Jericho, and the Chris Jericho stuff was more or less just a roadblock on the way. One thing I will give Chris Jericho though, and the Jericho Jericho-verse is that it did give us the Ops, because this was the first instance of Hook and Samoa Joe and Shibata all teaming up with each other. So that is the very one thing that the Jericho-verse did give us, was the Ops, which I think are a great stable. But the Jericho stuff with Hook was just awful and overall hurt Hook's career for the short term, and in a way it kind of hurt Hook's credibility going into this big feud with the Death Riders, as he definitely doesn't feel like he has the same amount of star power as a lot of the rest of the people in this feud, like Jon Moxley, like Samoa Joe, like Pac, and Chris Jericho and his time in the Jericho-verse definitely hindered that. Then of course there's Bandido, who won the Ring of Honor World title off of him recently. In fact, let's just lump in Mark Briscoe as well, who Jericho beat for the world title, and the entire Ring of Honor brand. So Bandido first started feuding with Jericho when he returned to AEW/Ring of Honor officially at the Hammerstein show. He attacked Jericho and instantly concussed himself. They then had a match on Collision for the Ring of Honor title in February, which Chris Jericho won for some inexplicable reason because Jericho-verse booking, before Bandido finally won the belt this past Sunday at AEW Dynasty in a super overbooked match that just didn't really make much sense in terms of how the referee was officiating it. But end of the day, at least he won the damn belt. I will say, I don't think it was very effective having him win the belt in a series of unexciting matches with Jericho. We know how good Bandido can be, and Ring of Honor is meant to be the work rate wrestling company, yet him and Bandido were just working these slow, heatless matches. And that's obviously down to Jericho, who cannot go to the same degree he used to be able to anymore, and should never be holding the Ring of Honor World title when guys like Bandido were there and could be having way more exciting matches with up-and-coming wrestlers and members of the AEW/Ring of Honor roster. As for Mark Briscoe, I feel as though he definitely lost purpose losing the Ring of Honor World title. I feel as though he also lost it far too soon, and I don't hate the role that Mark Briscoe is currently in, just one of the bigger baby faces on AEW TV, wrestles near weekly, can be thrown into multi-man tags and be put up against big stars to put other people over. But I think it's safe to say I probably would prefer to see him feuding with Bandido over that belt than Jericho doing it. I would have much rather had Mark Briscoe defending the Ring of Honor title against Bandido rather than Jericho winning it off against Mark and then defending against Bandido himself. We just didn't need that to happen. Bandido versus Mark Briscoe, a perfect Ring of Honor World title match, everything the brand represents. And then for the Ring of Honor brand itself, this absolutely did not benefit Ring of Honor in any way whatsoever. He hardly appeared on Ring of Honor TV, and if he did, it was usually in a backstage promo. It was never to wrestle or do anything in the ring. And apparently a big reason why Chris Jericho was given the Ring of Honor World title was because he's a recognizable name, and Ring of Honor were trying to get a TV deal or a broadcasting deal, so the idea was that getting Chris Jericho a recognizable name to represent the brand could help with that. But seemingly it hasn't, because Chris Jericho was a champion for what, like 5-6 months, and I've not heard a single thing about a Ring of Honor TV deal in a long while. It just didn't help Ring of Honor whatsoever. He was taking up AEW TV time with this title when he should just be doing it in Ring of Honor, and the stuff he was doing on AEW TV was absolute garbage, so it didn't represent the brand well or really convince any AEW fans to tune into Ring of Honor to go see him, which, spoiler alert, you wouldn't see him anyway, because he never appeared on the fucking show. But anyway, the other people to talk about are the Learning Tree members themselves. Big Bill, bro, what the fuck did I just lag there? Big Bill and Brian Keith. I'm gonna keep that take in there, why not? My judgment on Big Bill and Brian Keith will be withheld for now, because nothing's really happened. They've literally been like broken up for maybe a week from Chris Jericho, so we've not really seen the effect. However, I will say, I definitely think them just being in the Learning Tree maybe held them back a bit. Sure, it got them TV time, but every time they were on together without Jericho, just doing stuff on their own, like Big Bill, like Brian Keith, they were doing great stuff. Big Bill has got over so many places he's been in AEW. Brian Keith had that great match against Bandido, which Jericho then stole the great spot from 3 days later. Everything they did without Chris Jericho for the last few months was way better than anything they did with Chris Jericho, which I think just goes to show that they were being held back by Chris Jericho in these last few months, and in a way, it didn't really benefit them other than getting them some TV time, but even so, the TV time they were getting was segments that people were skipping and don't want to watch. So overall, I'd probably say that, well, we didn't really win. Jericho is gone. Obviously, that isn't permanent, so he could still come back easily, and the damage has already been done for so many people in AEW who feuded with Chris Jericho and really got nothing out of it. And I just hope that if Chris Jericho is to come back, he kind of steps back a bit, maybe takes on more of a mouthpiece role, or just tries to put more people over in more meaningful ways. I appreciate the fact he lost to Hook in the end. I appreciate the fact he lost to Bandito in the end. But the fact that the feuds were so elongated out and were just made so unbearably long and terrible to watch meant that those wins for them really didn't mean anything in the end, and these feuds with Chris Jericho are just going to be looked at as stains on their careers. But for now, I guess we can remain happy that Chris Jericho is gone from AEW TV for at least a bit. Please, Jericho, for the love of God, do not form another stable when you come back. But guys, that's it from me on this video. If you did enjoy it, then be sure to smash the like button and leave a comment down below your thoughts on Chris Jericho's run in AEW and the Jericho Verse and the Jericho Vortex and the fact he's now gone from AEW for now. And subscribe with those notifications on so you never miss a video on this channel. I'll see you all in the next one. Goodbye and keep on rolling.